Well, hey there, chemists. We're ready to summarize our last week, week 8. We are down to just a couple weeks left. While I was prepping and doing some work for week 8, I came across this meme, and it is actually the highlight from the week. You can see here we have Samuel L. Jackson versus Samuel D. Jackson. So they're like supposed to be enantiomers of each other. And then to add to the chemistry pun, we have I hope this goes chiral. And I love everything about that. I even posted it to Facebook. But another thing about this being a highlight for me beyond just like a cheesy meme that, only a few people of my Facebook friends might have gotten, I specifically remember the moment in my undergraduate work, which was, seriously like 2 decades ago. Sorry for that noise. Don't worry about it. Decades ago, when I learned about chirality, because I just was like mind blown. The idea that these two molecules can really look identical, they're mirror images of each other, but actually are different. They have different chemical properties, same physical properties because of their same connectivity and stuff, but different chemical properties and behave differently within a living system. And I so distinctly remember that moment. So the highlight of this week for me is really getting to pass on that kind of mind blown moment. So let's talk some specifics. So we had lots of learning outcomes this week. So this week we were looking at one of the first macromolecules that we're going to be exploring in our biochemistry unit, which is carbohydrates, predominantly the molecule of energy for the human body. So we looked at their function, their structure, and then we get introduced to that idea of chirality because our carbohydrates are chiral molecules and therefore have these right-handed and left-handed versions. And not only are they chiral, but individual carbon atoms within them can be chiral, which really explodes into a world of isomers because we can have so many different compounds with the exact same chemical formula and the same connectivity pattern, but spatially rearranged in a way to be different. And again, mind blown. We explored some of these objectives through some various discussion questions. Our first one being, how does this relate to previously covered content? I always feel that the transition from our very organic chemistry sections into the biochemistry is a little bit weird. Personally, I just feel it feels very different. The questions come out differently. It's less problem solving and more memorization. So one of the things I like to do with that then is to keep going back. It preps us for our final as well, to keep going, how does this relate to what we've learned already? And by definition, carbohydrates relate to stuff we've covered already in the course because they are polyhydroxyl, so many hydroxyl groups or many alcohol, aldehydes and ketones. So in learning about carbohydrates, you're reviewing what you learned about the chemistry of aldehydes and ketones and how they can react with alcohols, which we see in the cycling up of our linear carbohydrates into their cyclic structures, which have a little bit more stability. Our carbonyl carbon reacts with the alcohol and we get a hemiacetal linkage there at the new chiral carbon that's created in that process. So we have a review there of how aldehydes and ketones can react with alcohols. And then in the forming of our di and polysaccharides, we review even that hemiacetals can engage in another reaction with alcohols to create an acetyl linkage. And so that glycosidic linkage that you might hear about or talk about relates to the organic family acetals that we learned about earlier in the quarter. And then on top of that, we talked about Benedict's solution during our chapter on aldehydes and ketones. And so we get to revisit that of how does it work, when does it work, and now specifically applying that to our sugar molecules. Our second question is about these two seemingly identical molecules. Again, going back to my organic chemistry undergraduate experience, those look the same to me. If you showed me a model of the two of them, I would not be able to distinguish them. They just look the same. But what we actually have here is enantiomers of the drug, specifically thalidomide. Thalidomide was used in the 1960s to treat various things, but one of the more interesting treatments for nausea associated with morning sickness for pregnant women. And the problem is we have this right-handed and this left-handed version. So we have these two chiral molecules, these mirror images of each other. So these are enantiomers because they're full-on mirror images. Well, in the body, one of these is fine and is safe and probably does successfully treat morning sickness. But the other is not, because they're not the same molecule. And as you saw when you read the two provided articles, it led to a lot of birth defects, fetal death. They actually believe that the numbers, we don't have very accurate numbers because a lot of miscarriages and fetal death at the time probably were due to thalidomide, really the one version of thalidomide. How this relates to our content is, of course, with our carbohydrates. We see this enantiomerism, these two different, the right-handed and the left-handed versions, for the first time. How it relates to just on a whole is in pharmaceuticals, we have to be really careful when we're making a drug. Is it okay to give people both versions of this molecule? And if not, how do we separate two nearly identical? Because they're going to have the same physical properties, so it's going to be very challenging to be able to physically separate them to make sure you're only giving someone that right-handed version or that left-handed version or whatever one is physiologically safe in the body. And then, of course, I told you guys that earlier in the quarter I can relate anything to diabetes. And it's just especially in chemistry or biology. And so we have how does our current topic relate to type 1 diabetes? And Franklin, that is not the name of the person, but Franklin does represent a real life Moses Lake person, not my daughter, but someone else that I know, and an experience that he and his parents had. And so I challenged you to think about, like, what do you think they treated him with? And there was a really great discussion there on did they give him insulin or not? And no, they didn't give him insulin. Obviously, children with type 1 diabetes, adults with diabetes do need insulin. But insulin is a hormone for lowering blood sugar. They needed to raise his blood sugar. Well, we have another hormone in our body made actually in the same organ, but by different cells, that helps do that. And that's that glucagon hormone. And so I was going to bring one of our glucagon kits, but I forgot it downstairs, and I'm not going to bother going to get it because I did show you a picture of it in the video, in the note that comes up, because we do have one such kit as well. So that hormone, that glucagon hormone that you guys normally make, and a type 1 diabetic can still make, but the insulin in their system actually blocks its release. And so they need to be forced giving glucagon. And what does glucagon do? It stimulates the breaking apart of this. And this is a polysaccharide in the body, stored mostly in the liver and in the muscles, called glycogen. So it's like starch, or even cellulose for plants. It's glucose bound over and over and over and over by those acetyl linkages. And so the role of glucagon in the body is to snip that glycogen up, and therefore releasing, I can get my little mouse over, releasing those glucose molecules and then raising the blood sugar. And so what his family needed to do was mix up that glucagon and inject it into their son as soon as possible in order to raise his blood sugar. So we have the, carbohydrates, we have the glucose, which gives us the short-term energy, and then we have glycogen, which we store for that long-term energy. Or longer term, couple hours worth of energy. And then as your blood sugar dips, your body can bring it back up. So we have insulin and glucagon are a part of the homeostasis balance of keeping our blood sugar between about 70 and 120, assuming you can release both of those hormones well and on your own, which is what a type 1 diabetic is unable to do. So what's next? So we spend quite a bit of time on our carbohydrates because they have some pretty significant elements, and we're going to, spend much less time on the rest of the macromolecules of physiological systems. So we're going to explore lipids this week and proteins, and then just kind of touch a little bit on our nucleic acids. And, you're going to see them everywhere because the macromolecules are everywhere. I also want to talk, though, about wrapping up the quarter on a whole, because I know people are starting to have questions because we have 2 weeks left, which includes our finals week. So we really have just a little bit left. Really, this week right here, this is our last week of content. This is our last module. This is our last week where we will be covering new content. So this upcoming lab, the one that's due on Saturday, this is our last lab. And then we will have our Unit 4 test. It's going to open Friday at the latest, and then it closes Tuesday, as we've been doing lately. Now, because we're not moving into new content, you might want to go ahead and wait until Monday or Tuesday and use that time to prep a little bit. And that would be understandable because you won't be getting behind in next week's content by doing that. We will have a final exam next week. As you guys know from the syllabus, it's 20% of your grade. It is not one of the grades that can be dropped. So even if you're very happy with your grade in the class, please understand you do want to make sure to take that. The plan at present, the tentative plan at present, is that it will open up Wednesday of next week and close on Friday. And so normally in our face-to-face class, you have this is the time you're going to take your final. You have a little bit more freedom in this. There's no reason for me to set a particular date or time. It'll be open and you take it as what works best for your schedule. It will likely, I haven't really worked out all the details here, so kind of more information to follow, but it will likely have 2 parts. It will have a connect portion, so a multiple choice with maybe a little bit of non-multiple choice, just like our tests, kind of looking like a normal test. And then also a Canvas submission portion where you will like take a picture of some certain work and submit. And again, we'll talk more about that as we get closer and I know more, but just be aware to expect that in our next coming weeks. We're so close, you guys. We're almost there. So what's next for you? One thing I want to talk about a little bit is normally to review for the final, we would play a Kahoot game, and you can play Kahoot over Zoom. And so what I'd like to find out is if people are interested in that next Tuesday. So that would be kind of what our last day of the quarter would be, and then we move into finals week. So in order to kind of facilitate that and find out more information, I'm offering an extra credit point on this Unit 4 test for everyone who would let me know. And you can do that by email, Canvas message, or the remind text. It's fine because I'll just record it somewhere so that I can keep track. First of all, if you would attend, if it's offered, just yes or no. You're like, yes, I would come, no, I wouldn't. And if you would attend, what are some different times that would work for you? And that can be all sorts of times throughout the day, and I'll try to figure out then the best time. If there's not enough interest, I'm not going to bother just because it's not worth the work for me, and you can review for the final in your own ways. But I just want to get a kind of a general head count prediction of the likelihood of that. So even if you're telling me, no, I'd rather die, no thank you, you can get extra credit for that communication. Complete anything that is left from last week, and check feedback, etc. I'm still working on grading your quizzes. And then as far as the rest, you know the drill. Do your discussion posts, get that one in early on Monday. You're going to have reading assignments and maybe learn smarts that go with them, etc., etc. It's the same format that we've been doing all along. If you have any questions or concerns, please let me know, and I'll see you soon.